Improvisation is not actually about making everything up on the spot. And this is similar in telling a story and the way we use language. Improvisation could be the way you perform an already written piece of music. If you tell a story, you can just read someone else's, and not everything you do has been written down before. So you might change your voice for a different character, or leave a pause for dramatic emphasis. So when you read the text, you improvise these things, and someone else may do this entirely differently, and you might read the story differently tomorrow and the day after again. So we might even go as far as to say that this delivery of the text is actually what makes the story come to life. In a way, we all improvise in our music making, whether we want to or not. Now, you might also add an extra word here or there. If you notice your audience hadn't quite realized the monster was really big, perhaps you'll repeat the word big a few times. In music, you might take a melody and improvise extra notes to give the story more character, or paint the emotions in a brighter color, or add some elements to slightly change the story. We could take that quite far. For instance, we can retell a famous story, like a fairy tale, but change some things in it. Perhaps Pinocchio has a sister. Or Cinderella runs a gang of mice in New York. In music, we might take a national anthem or a popular song and improvise a new piece of music. Perhaps we only use a few themes of it, or perhaps we only touch remotely on the melody and change the piece entirely. But the analogy is also structural. Language follows a certain structure, so we can use this to formulate new stories. We could compare learning classical music improvisation to learning a new language that you have heard before but never spoken or written. So, as classical musicians, we have mostly already learned how to pronounce the words, so that's one thing. We have played the music of others plenty of times. What we don't always know is how the grammar works. How do the notes fit together in a musically logical way? And in some cases, we could also say that we still have to learn a bit about the meaning of the words and the signs we use. For example, how do you express a question mark in music? Most stories have a certain structure as well. Most likely you wouldn't start with, "and they lived happily ever after." Joseph Campbell, for instance, describes the typical way a myth is structured in his The Hero's Journey. In the same way, when we improvise a concerto, we know there are sections for everybody to play and sections for the soloist. One problem with classical music improvisation is that a lot of it, of classical music, comes from long ago. This is a little bit like the language Latin, which the Romans spoke centuries ago. Today, we don't know anymore what it sounded like, and most people who deal with Latin don't write new stories in this language, let alone improvise them. This is similar in classical music improvisation. We know from different stories and teaching methods that people used to improvise classical music in the past. They used to speak it, make up their own stories. But we only have their written stories left. So when learning to improvise, we take those written stories and try to imagine ways in which we could learn to tell the same type of stories, but in the moment, improvised. On the other hand, sometimes when we improvise, there was nothing before, except all the memories that we have from the music we have heard and played in our lives before. and we might get a poetic rendering of a feeling we have, or just some words randomly assembled. Improvisation, cold feet, running water, jump.